So I started off by mentioning that SCI have been producing guidance on light steel framing and cold form sections in fire and how to design those sections for some time. So you can see here that first publication, P129, was back in 1993. We later had a bit of an overview document, this ED016, but that's a very sort of lightweight publication. I think it's only 8 or 12 pages long, just to give a very sort of quick introduction to the topic and represent what you can do with light steel framing. So it was well overdue, the need for a much more comprehensive and updated publication. So we started work on P424, and that eventually was published in, as I say, 2021. That was made possible with the support of members of our SCI Light Steel Forum. So these are primarily light steel frame manufacturers and other sort of component manufacturers of cold form sections. So you can see them listed there, and obviously their support is very much appreciated. Without it, we wouldn't be able to produce new publications like this, and it was very much needed by the industry at large. As well as the members from those companies, we also engaged with fire specialists and industry bodies, so whether they be from universities or warranty providers and that sort of thing. We spoke to a lot of people and got their input when producing P424. So P424 and buildings generally, when it comes to fire resistance, should be designed in accordance with the UK building regulations, and it's part B of the UK building regulations that deals with fire safety. And as with all parts of the building regulations, we have these approved documents, and for each part there is an approved document. So approved document B is obviously for part B of the building regulations, and it's actually split into 2 volumes. So volume 1 dealing with dwellings and volume 2 dealing with other types of buildings. So this is a key document when knowing what to do for designing with or designing buildings to satisfy the building regulations. So it's important to remember that the approved documents are guidance on how to satisfy the building regulations. It's the building regulations themselves which are the legal requirements, but nevertheless the approved documents are indeed very useful, and following that is the easiest way to satisfy building regulations. And the building regulations themselves, and therefore the approved document, is split into further parts and further requirements, and I've got them listed on the slide there, and it's actually requirement B3, which is particularly important when we're talking about light steel framing and designing the structure of a building. Lots of the other elements when it comes to fire resistance and fire safety are to do with things that you put on the structure afterwards. So they may be cavity barriers, they may be finishes, that sort of thing. But we need to design the structure itself to satisfy requirement B3, and that's all about the internal fire spread within a building. So the main purpose of requirement B3 is to make sure that the structure can remain stable, can remain able to support loads for a period of time, an appropriate period of time, as it says there, in the event of a fire. Part of B3 is also that the building is subdivided into compartments, so that if there is a fire within a compartment, it doesn't easily spread to other compartments. So the boundary walls of that compartment prevent fire spread into neighboring compartments. Typically, a compartment will be an apartment or a flat or a single sort of dwelling unit. Sometimes with student residences, you may get a sort of a group of apartments or a group of rooms forming one fire compartment. But it depends on obviously how the structure and the fire safety has been devised for a particular building. But certainly the compartment walls must prevent the spread of fire for a period of time. And along with that is the provision of cavity barriers, so not a purely structural thing. This is something that is applied after the structure or as part of the construction process, but isn't the structure itself, to make sure that obviously fire can't spread within hidden cavities between different compartments and around to different parts of the building. When we're talking about fire resistance or fire performance, there are essentially three types of performance that are applicable to load-bearing elements of structure, and in some cases is also applicable to non-load-bearing elements of structure. So the first, and these are sort of referred to as the REI requirements. So the R is standing for resistance. So this is a structural requirement. So very much that when exposed to fire, the elements, whether it be a wall or a floor or even a column, doesn't collapse for a certain period when subjected to design loads in the fire condition. The E is for integrity. That is to make sure that that separating element doesn't allow fire or smoke or heat to pass through it too easily within that certain fire period as well. And then I is for insulation, to make sure that even though the element may be able to resist the loads and prevent fire or smoke passing through it, it also needs to have a certain amount of insulation, so that the temperature on the non-fire side of that separating element doesn't increase too high, so that you don't get things like combustion on the non-fire side of the wall just due to the heat that may be coming through that wall. And of course those requirements are expressed in more detail and quantitatively in relevant documents, building regulations and fire test standards. And how those actually apply to things that we might be dealing with a light steel framing building. So for load-bearing floors or walls, it would be that all of those that would be relevant. So the R, the E, and the I requirements would need to be satisfied. If we're talking about individual elements, such as a column, so obviously a column is not going to be a separating element, so the E or the I wouldn't be relevant, but very much the R requirement would be. And if we're talking about things like non-load bearing partitions or even external walls, the E and the I would be relevant, but not the requirement to resist load. And all of those are related to a certain fire resistance period, and what fire resistance period is applicable to each different circumstance is given in the approved documents. So that's not given in the building regulations themselves. It is very much the approved documents that specify the recommended fire resistance periods. And those fire resistance periods will very much depend on the type of structure and the purpose of that structure and the size of that structure. So we can see this is a table taken from SCI publication P424, and we can see various building types specified down the different rows of this table, with and without sprinklers, and across the top we've got different heights of buildings, and then approximately what number of stories that might refer to. Obviously, the more number of stories, the higher the building is going to be, and therefore the height is going to increase. And you can see, if we just look at the first line to do with houses, so that would be single residences. Generally, you'd be down in the 30 minutes category, but if you've got higher buildings, you could be up to 60 minutes. Talking about blocks of flats, you can see lower buildings have a lower time period that they would need to satisfy, and then once you get higher, so the option without sprinklers is not permitted, and you must have sprinklers. Just because you've got sprinklers, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a reduced fire resistance period. For flats, in some situations like offices, you can see in this case here, without sprinklers would be 60 minutes, with sprinklers would be down to 30 minutes. So it very much depends on the application and what it says in the approved document. So as I say, this table was taken from P424 when it was published. It is very much a case that you must check the latest edition of the approved documents, particularly in the field of fire resistance and fire safety. There has been quite a few amendments over the last few years. So always worth checking the very latest and making sure there hasn't been any amendments since whatever guidance it is you're looking at. So yeah, don't just follow the slides or follow the publication. Do check that there hasn't been any amendments to the approved documents and any other guidance that you might be following.